Mr. Speaker, I fully support this bill. Thank you.
Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm not quite sure what the member who's just resumed his seat was trying to say, but I think it's probably better just to give him the charity of my silence in response to the contribution. Perhaps by the third reading he will have organised his thoughts in a little better structure. I was quite disturbed in the earlier contribution to this debate from the Minister of Conservation when I was speaking and said that the Conservation Accord, if you like, interesting term to use in this context perhaps, but the accord between particularly Labour and National, because it was prior to other parties coming into the House, was forged in 1987 when the Conservation Act was first passed and native logging on all but the Timberlands area was stopped. And that has carried on ever since. And then in 2000, 14 years ago, when the next round of decisions was made, the extraction and logging of native timber was stopped ever since. When I said that first happened 27 years ago, and it was a bipartisan agreement, the Minister said to his colleagues, so it's 27 years old, does that mean we shouldn't change it? And I was a little concerned about that because I didn't think that this was a proposal to fundamentally change the Conservation Act. I thought it was a response to a one-off event. But I tell you what, I don't share Damien O'Connor's view of trusting. I think that the Minister may well be using this as a stalking horse for opening up extraction of native timber in the future, and that would be such a massive step backwards. It's something that was very hard on the West Coast. I've lived there for over a decade. I understand the views of those communities, not nearly as well as people who have lived there their entire life, but I lived there for long enough to get to know the place well, and I understand the thinking about the resources that are within their own community. But it doesn't always mean that it's going to be the right thing for the future of New Zealand. And if this is a step towards opening up extraction as the basis of a sustainable employment on the West Coast, then I think it's the wrong move. So there's been a few jibes thrown at the Labour Party, and I think that's a bit rich, frankly, given what's going on within some sections of the National Party at the moment. But I want to just make it clear about our position on this bill. I did in the first reading, actually, but I'll do it again because some members may not have had the opportunity to hear it. We put up a series of proposals to the government in relation to our concerns about the process and the content of this legislation. The first was that there was no need for it to go through all stages under urgency. I heard the contribution that Gareth Hughes from the Greens made earlier in his point of order, and I absolutely agree. It was our proposal to the government that instead of all stages under urgency, that there be a truncated period of time for select committee. It would be a little nonsensical for us to try and drag this debate out if we understood that it was going to be passed anyway. But that wasn't the point. It wasn't to drag it out. It wasn't to have more beach getting beyond a usable position. It was because in a reasonably robust democracy, the right for people to have their say should always be exercised unless there's some extreme situation where it needn't be. And in this case, it would have been very easy to refer this bill to the Local Government and Environment Committee, or Primary Producers Committee. Apparently they run not a bad little ship at that select committee, I've heard, and say for a period of 2 weeks and then require it to come back and then it could proceed at pace. It's not a very large bill. You know, the debate's not going to go on for too long. So that was the first request that we made of the government, a truncated period, not to delay it, to give New Zealanders a right to say, including people from the West Coast. And we had a series of other proposals that we made that are outlined in our supplementary order papers. Mr. Speaker, I do think there's a greater concern at the heart of this legislation. I no longer, having listened to the contribution from the National Party members, particularly the Minister of Conservation, I no longer believe that this is an opportunity for West Coasters to have jobs. It's clear they've turned down the supplementary order paper that is in the name of Damien O'Connor to make sure that West Coasters get any jobs first. That's not of interest to the National Party. I do think the disdain in which they've been regarding the Conservation Act and our our significant step in as a government requiring protection of our native trees. The disdain in which they've discussed that, I think, gives great alarm to members of the public around the country. This is more likely to be a stalking horse for future logging of our native trees. It's really frustrating, I suppose, particularly in this week that we've had, that the Minister of Conservation can show such passion and concern for dead trees at the same time as he shows little regard for the 55 remaining Māoris dolphins that we have. We have the International Whaling Commission, their scientific committee, saying for the third year in a row this government's not doing enough. That species will be extinct unless they take better measures, and nothing has happened as a result of that. For 3 years in a row, they've been just tinkering at the edges, not substantive protections, and certainly not enough to save the species. But at the same time, we have legislation going through all stages under urgency to do something that this House has said no to for nearly 3 decades. It's a puzzle. I think it's a stalking horse. It offers no hope of either guaranteed jobs, let alone sustainable jobs for West Coasters, and that's why I'll be voting against it.
Eugenie Sage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd just like to explain to any of the New Zealanders who are listening to this debate or